I pray that I might speak to you this morning in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. So I'm pretty sure that we're all familiar with those voices in our culture. Those voices in our culture that constantly try to bombard us with the message that we are not good enough. Not skinny enough, not pretty enough, not young enough, not successful enough, not smart enough. That's the stuff that advertising feeds off of. Any commercial you watch on TV is trying to convince you that you're not good enough unless you buy this product. But here's the thing. Those cultural voices, they are nothing compared with that inner voice that a lot of us often wrestle with in our own minds. A voice that also tries to convince us that we are not good enough. Sometimes even worse than that. Sometimes the voice in our mind tries to convince us that tries to make us feel like we are worthless, or that we need to become someone other than we are right now. That we need to become someone other than we are right now before we can be deserving of love and acceptance. Now, I might be alone on that. And if that's the case, then I'm probably preaching to myself today, and that's okay too. The thing is, in my own life, I've suffered from anxiety and self-esteem issues for a lot of years. And when that anxiety is at its worst, there's this voice in my head that I can't get to shut up. It's a voice that is constantly telling me, you're not good enough. You don't try hard enough. You don't work hard enough. Your sermons, they just aren't perfect enough. You don't visit enough. It's a voice that tries to convince me that I'm a fake and a fraud as a priest. And I gotta tell you that it can be absolutely and utterly exhausting, always trying to do everything perfectly all the time in order to prove those voices wrong. Now again, that might just be me. But the fact that millions of people all around the world, as we came to the beginning of a new year, the fact that millions of people have made New Year's resolutions to change something about themselves, whether it be going on a diet, lose some weight, stop smoking, stop drinking, spend more time with the family, be kinder, be more generous. The fact that there are millions of people who desperately want to change something about themselves tells me that maybe I'm not alone after all. Now, it's one thing to make a New Year's resolution if you really want to take better care of yourself, if you want to improve on some area of your life. But it's another matter altogether if the motivation for your New Year's resolution is to prove that voice in your head wrong about you not being worthy of love and acceptance just the way you are. So my wife, Amy, she knows that I have this ongoing battle with anxiety and that horrible voice in my mind. She came across this song the other day that's called Be Kind to Yourself by Andrew Peterson. And she told me that she really thinks that this should be my theme song for 2016. And I thought that maybe there might be others who might like to make it their theme song too. Let me share some of the lyrics with you. I'm not singing. It goes like this. You got all that emotion that's heaving like an ocean, and you're drowning in a deep, dark well. I can hear it in your voice that if you only had a choice, you would rather be anyone else. And then at this point in the song, picture God Himself speaking right into the depths of your soul. I can hear it in your voice that if you only had a choice, you would rather be anyone else. But God says, I love you just the way that you are. Be kind to yourself. Then the song goes on. I know it's hard to hear it when the anger in your spirit is pointed like an arrow at your chest. When the voices in your mind are anything but kind, and you can't believe your Father knows best. I love you just the way that you are. Be kind to yourself. How does it end when the war that you're in is just you against you against you? You got to learn to love yourself. You got to learn to love yourself. And here's my favorite line in the song. You can't expect to be perfect. It's a fight you have to forfeit. You belong to me whatever you do. So lay down your weapon, take a deep breath, and just believe that I love you. So the message that I take away from that song is that yes, there are voices in our culture that constantly try to tell us that we are not good enough. And yes, I think there's a lot of us who have an even louder voice in our own minds that are anything but kind. Voices that constantly seek to tear us down and tell us we're worthless. But there's another voice. There is another voice. A voice that wants nothing more than to be a light shining in the darkness of all of our anxieties and all of our self-doubtings. It's a voice that says, I love you just the way that you are. A voice that says, you can't expect to be perfect. You got to give up that fight. A voice that says, you belong to me no matter what you do. And here's the thing. We have a choice. We have a choice whether or not we think we do. We have a choice as to which voice we are going to listen to. We have a choice as to which voice we are going to allow to have power in our lives. We have a choice as to which voice we are going to allow to shape the direction that our lives will take and the purpose and the meaning that our lives will take on. Which voice will you listen to in your life? Now, if all of this is sounding a little too chicken noodle soup for the soul for your life, if all of this is seeming like it lacks in any reference or grounding in Scripture, let me bring us back to today's gospel. Today is Baptism of the Lord Sunday. And every year, this day kind of comes a little abruptly. It comes a little abruptly after our Christmas celebrations. For 12 days, we celebrate the birth of little baby Jesus lying in a manger, culminating with the visit of the wise men in our Epiphany celebration, which we had last week. And then the very next week, we go from this little baby Jesus that we've been celebrating to this 30-year-old man who's getting baptized in the Jordan River. And since, just like the Christmas story, since we hear the story about Jesus' baptism every single year, we think we know how this story goes. John's been dunking people in the river for a while now. It seems like everyone is going out to be baptized by him. And then Jesus comes along. Jesus comes along and he wants to get baptized too. But John says, no way, man, I shouldn't be baptizing you. You should be baptizing me. But Jesus says, don't worry. It's all part of the plan. We got to do it this way. Stick with the script. So then John finally agrees and baptizes Jesus. We think we know the story. But is that really how it happened according to Luke's telling of it? Is that really what we just heard in that gospel? I don't know if you noticed it in the bulletin or not. But today's appointed gospel that we heard from Luke, it leaves out 2 verses. What we just heard, it comes from Luke chapter 3, verses 15 to 17, and then it jumps to verses 21 to 22. We didn't get to hear what Luke has to say in verses 18 to 20. So in the first part of today's gospel, everyone was trying to figure out if maybe John, he's a pretty creative character, everyone's trying to figure out, hey, maybe John's the promised Messiah. But John sets them straight. He says, I'm not your guy. He says, I'm not the Savior, but he's coming. The second part of today's gospel is Jesus' baptism. So the logical conclusion to make is that John is the one who baptizes Jesus. But the two verses that got left out, verses 18 to 20, they tell a different story. Let me read them to you. Luke says, so with many other exhortations, John proclaimed the good news to the people. But Herod, the ruler, who had been rebuked by John because of Herodias, his brother's wife, and because of all the evil things that Herod had done, Herod added to them all by shutting up John in prison. The other Gospels, Matthew and Mark, in telling this story about Jesus' baptism, they have John the Baptist being the one who does the dunking. They have John being the one who does the plunging of Jesus into the River Jordan. But in Luke's Gospel, John was sitting in a jail cell when Jesus came to be baptized. So he couldn't have done it. So what's the point Luke is trying to make by changing the details of this story? What's the point Luke is trying to make by changing the details so that John could not have been the one who baptized Jesus? Here's what I think. I think Luke is trying to say that Jesus' baptism wasn't about John. Jesus' baptism wasn't about what John was doing. It's not, when it comes to baptism, it's not about what the person who's doing the dunking is doing. Because quite frankly, in Luke's telling of this story, we never do get to find out who actually was the one who baptized Jesus. Jesus' baptism, and ours for that matter, it isn't about what the priest is doing. It isn't about what John is doing. Baptism is about what God is doing in our life. For a long time, think back to the Advent season. For a long time, John, he had been the voice that cried out in the wilderness preparing the way. Now, it is God himself who is that voice. It is God himself who speaks to us in and through the waters of baptism, just as that same voice spoke to Jesus at his baptism. As Jesus rose up out of the waters, as he was praying, the heaven was opened, and a voice came from heaven and spoke directly to Jesus and said, "You are my Son, the Beloved. With you I am well pleased." In a culture full of voices that constantly try to tell you that you are not good enough, in the struggles that a lot of us have with the voices in our minds telling us that we are not good enough, or not worthy enough, or deserving enough, in baptism there is another voice that says, "You are my child. You are my beloved. With you I am well pleased." It is a voice. It's a voice that reminds each and every one of us of our true identity. Our true identity as children of God. It is a voice that tells us we don't have to be perfect. We are loved for who we are, right here, right now, at this moment. And yet again, we have that choice. We get to choose. We get to choose the voice that we're going to listen to. Will we listen? What voice will we listen to? What voice will we give power to? What voice are we going to allow to shape the direction that our lives will take and the purpose and meaning our lives will take on? Baptism it really is about dying to an old way of living. Perhaps baptism is about dying to the old way of living in a way in which we absolutely and utterly exhaust ourselves by trying to prove all of these voices wrong when they tell us that we're not good enough, deserving of love and acceptance. Maybe baptism is about dying to that way of life and rising to a new way of living, of rising to a life in which each one of us finds a way to accept that there is absolutely nothing that we can ever do to earn God's love, because we are loved already. Loved for who we are right here, right now. The motivation for our choices and our actions in this new life, then, it stops being about trying to prove those voices wrong. It stops being about trying to earn anything from God or from one another. And it's our motivation for living as children of God. It becomes about living in response to the reality that we are loved already, just the way we are. And so in our life of discipleship, we give, we serve, we forgive, we love, not to earn, but because God first loved us. So which voice will you listen to in your life? May it be the voice of God that declares, "You are my child. You are the beloved, my beloved, and with you I am well pleased." Amen.